Hello and welcome to our WEBN special Political Pulse and Polling. I'm Maggie Smolka, and we're here to help you crunch the numbers for this season's major political races. On Tuesday, October 15th, there's a Congressional District 5 primary to fill Ed Markey's seat. Markey left when he was elected Massachusetts Senator, taking John Kerry's seat. Kerry left to replace Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. To help us break down the numbers, we have polling analyst Spencer Kimball. Welcome, Spencer.
Thank you for having me, Maggie.
So to begin, we're going to start by breaking down the districts. So can you describe their ethnic backgrounds?
Well, District 5 was reconfigured last year after the census, and now it kind of breaks in the middle with Waltham and Belmont as strong Armenian areas, and then over in the southern part and the northern part, more Caucasian white voters, and then we move over into the Revere-Winthrop area where we have more minority votes coming from.
What about the economic differences between each district?
Well, within the district there's a lot of economic disparity, to say. As I just mentioned, you have the Revere-Winthrop area up in that area where it's more economically depressed. Then you have really rich areas like Weston and Lexington and Waltham and Cambridge and Belmont and Wayland, all in the middle of the district, which are, the housing prices in those areas is about 3 times the value in the northern part. And then you have the southern part, which is really the more middle class area of Ashland and Southborough and Framingham.
Now, you just conducted a poll about the congressional race. How did you conduct this?
We called a random sample of likely voters in the district and asked them a series of questions about their attitudes and feelings towards the candidates and about the election.
Because the district is primarily Democrats, let's deal with this primary first. So what were your results?
Well, as you mentioned, the Cook report and the Rosenberg report both have this as what we call a plus 15 or a plus 16 Democratic district. So it's going to be very difficult for a Republican to be able to win in the general election. So this Democratic primary is seen by a lot of people as really the election. And so the first and most important result is who's winning. And it looks like State Senator Katherine Clark has been able to maintain her lead throughout the campaign. We've done a previous poll where she was winning, and now she's extended that lead to about 10 points over the rest of the field, getting about 29% of the vote. And because there's 7 candidates in the race, you're not going to need a majority, just a plurality of the vote. And that 30% mark will probably be enough to put her into the final election for December.
Can you talk a little bit about where the other candidates stand in the race?
Of course. Coming in second is Brownsberger, Will Brownsberger, state senator again. And Brownsberger is a very strong candidate as far as door-to-door, special elections. That's what he's kind of known for. And he's got a real strong area of support in the middle of the district because he's from Belmont. And he's polling about 50% in the middle of the district. The problem is that Clark is polling really strongly up in the northern part of the district. So he's not been able to make inroads into that area. In fact, Peter Katusian, the sheriff, he's polling better in the northern part of the district and in the southern part of the district. And the conventional wisdom was that he would do better in the middle area in the towns of Watertown and Belmont, where there's stronger Armenian voters, voting bloc for him to be able to get out his vote with. And so we'll have to see what happens on election night regarding how Peter does. As far as the other woman in the race, Karen Spilka, she was running kind of neck and neck with Katherine Clark at some point of the race, but she's kind of fallen behind. And this is primarily due because while she has a strong area in the southern part of the state, she has virtually no percentage of the vote in the middle and the northern part of the state. And that's because in that middle section, everybody's vying between Katusian and Brownsberger and Clark for that area of the vote. Perhaps the candidate that has got the most momentum at this juncture of the race is Sciortino. Carl Sciortino, the state rep. He's obviously made waves nationally for his television ad, the quote-unquote Tea Party father ad, which has about 400,000 views on YouTube. And he's moved up from our previous poll from 5% of the vote up to 16%. So we imagine that momentum will continue as we come into the final weekend here.
Can you talk a little bit more about this ad that has received so much attention? Is this going to help his campaign?
It certainly has moved him up in the polls. It's increased his name recognition, his viability. And, he's only 35 years old. And so for somebody, in electoral politics, it's not always about winning this race, but about setting yourself up for the next race. And he might be able to use this ad where his father is a Tea Party Republican and he's a liberal Democrat. In fact, he just got married to his longtime boyfriend just last week in the Old North Church. And so you can definitely see the differences between father and son. However, in the end, there's a feel-good moment where they both say that they love each other. And I think that has kind of propelled him into the national spotlight. And in Massachusetts, we really like national political figures. And that's maybe an opportunity that he will have in a future election.
Now, moving to the Republican Party, people have said that this is mostly a Democratic race. How are the Republicans playing out?
Well, just to put it in context, the Democrats have collectively spent about $3 million so far on the race, and they'll probably spend another $2 million collectively in the last couple of days. On the Republican side, only one Republican has filed any campaign finance papers, and that's Mike Stopa, and he has raised $4,000. So you only need to file papers if you raise $5,000 or more. So what this tells me is that the Republicans collectively probably couldn't even buy a used car. So there's a lack of money, a lack of attention is going to give them a lot of problems. And none of the candidates are very, very charismatic. Now, having said that, we've been looking at this race as well. And Tom Tierney, who was a Democrat, Republican, he's kind of bounced back and forth. He was leading in an early poll, but Frank Adivinola has really come on strong in the last couple of weeks. He's received endorsements from local groups, from newspapers. He's really been pressing the flesh and working really hard, and we've seen his numbers skyrocket up into about the 30%. And with three candidates in there, 35, 40% will be enough to win the Republican nomination. So we wouldn't be surprised to see Frank be able to pull this out, though Tom is obviously a strong contender as well.
Now, so Clark seems to have the majority of the vote. She's at 29%, you said. So the Progressive Change Campaign Committee recently released a poll that said Clark voted for a bill that cuts pensions for workers. And in the same poll, it said that she also voted to expand government wiretapings on Americans. So how is this going to negatively affect Clark's campaign, if at all affected?
It's the last week of the election, and this is when you start throwing off everything you can. I saw an email from Shortino complaining about the wiretapping. In fact, in the debate the other night, there was some attacks on her because she's the lead horse, and so they have to try to bring her down. What's interesting within the Democratic field is all of the candidates have a very high favorability rating because for the most part, this has been a very positive election from the Democrats. They've been saying, what they want to do as opposed to tearing down each other. This is all changing now that we're coming down to the finish line. And anytime we throw mud in an election, not only is the person who the mud is being thrown at gets dirty, but when you pick up mud, you get dirty as well. And so I got to imagine that their favorabilities are all going to drop a little bit because of these recent attacks, though Clark was around 63% favorable and 17% unfavorable, which is a very high ratio, as compared to Spilka, who is at the lower end at a 45% favorable, and the other three legitimate candidates, they are in the 50 percentile. So we're going to see over the course of this weekend a lot of information be dropped to try to bring down Clark, and so somebody else can win. And really what Clark will try to do is just confuse the issues. And the more confusing all of this is, it will keep the voters from thinking about it. Now, regarding the wiretapping, Clark is really echoing President Obama's policy on wiretapping and NSA surveillance. And while that policy is more of a conservative Republican policy out of the Bush administration, the Democrats who are running against her are seizing upon this opportunity to potentially weaken her on this issue. However, the polling shows that security and surveillance, it's not an issue for the voters. What's the issue is the pocketbook issues, jobs and taxes. And unless they can get her on one of those two, and that's why they're trying to attack her on the jobs issue that you mentioned earlier, because that's something that will resonate with voters and they'll talk about. But we'll have to see what happens, because this has been an election that's gotten very little media coverage, virtually no national media coverage, and we'll have to see if people actually tune in to this race.
Why were these attacks just now released? Why did they wait until the last week?
It's a classic campaign ploy in that most people don't tune into an election till the end. And so if you release these attacks earlier, potentially the other side will be able to build up an argument against it and counter whatever attacks are being made. So that's one approach to why they throw out, they're sometimes called midnight mailers or midnight flyers, and that in the last couple of days of the election, you're going to get an auto call or a direct mail piece or a flyer left under your door, really criticizing the other candidate, which you wouldn't normally do during the election, during the campaign itself, because you want to increase your name recognition and your favorability. And anytime, and we've all seen it, anytime you see like two friends argue, you really have a lesser liking for both of them. And that's something that the candidates have been trying to avoid throughout this entire campaign, because some of them are going to be looking to run for other offices in the 2014 cycle.
What have you been seeing are some of the issues that people want addressed from their 5th Congressional District leader?
Well, I think jobs are still a priority. The economy is still a priority. Education in the Democratic primary is an important issue. Healthcare is still an important issue. But issues like the deficit, those are more conservative Republican issues. And in the polling, Democrats don't really care about that right now. So I don't see them going to be talking about the deficit. And I think the wiretapping might pull at some strings, but because this is the same type of policy that the president is advocating for, that they're going to have some issues there. And just to bring it full circle, regarding the attacks on the wiretapping, Clark is going to be able to hide behind the presidential coattails of President Obama and say this is the president's idea. And President Obama has over a 60% approval rating here in Massachusetts. Other parts of the country is a little different. One thing that was also curious within the poll that we saw is that 47% of the district think that we're headed in the wrong direction, and only 33% think that we're actually headed in the right direction. And so people might be interested in some sort of change. But most of the candidates that are running on the Democratic side are, not, I wouldn't say career politicians, but they've held elective office for a little while and may not be the right messenger in the general election, which is a very outside chance for a Republican to sneak in. And no way am I claiming that will happen, but that would be a slim opportunity for the Republican nominee to be able to grasp those animosity towards the current situation in the district.
Now, 2 progressive congressmen have endorsed Carl Sciarrentino, and the Progressive Change Committee says Elizabeth Warren needs someone else in Congress. It doesn't look like Warren has endorsed anyone yet, but using her name, how will this help or hurt Sciarrentino's campaign? Very interesting point that you bring up, because Sciarrentino has been sending out saying, oh, Warren needs somebody to stand with her, and I'm that person. Former Congressman Dennis Kucinich came out and endorsed Sciarrentino. And so what he's doing is moving further to the left. And what Warren is potentially going to do is say, so right now it almost looks like, hey, I'm being endorsed by Warren, which sounds great, unless Warren comes out over the next couple of days and says, I am not endorsing Carl Sciarrentino, in which case it really backfires, because
it's one thing to get the endorsement, it's another thing to get the negative side of it and say, no, I am not endorsing this person. In fact, I'm not endorsing anybody. But if she mentions him by name, that would really hurt his chances of being able to capture that message that he's trying to spread throughout the district. And normally sitting congressmen and women and senators and presidents, they don't get involved in party primaries. They allow the voters to decide who the nominee is going to be, and then they'll get involved in the general election and be out stumping for the nominee.
Do you think the LGBTQ community will be voting for Sciortino?
As we mentioned, he just got married last week, and you would think that would really give him, a leg up within the LGBT community. However, from what I've read, it's not that any of these Democratic nominees are opposed to gay marriage or opposed to gay rights. And so I got to imagine that at the end of the day, they're not really going to get into the fight of it, because Sciortino is not the lead candidate. So they don't want to endorse somebody and then end up having somebody else win. And that person who wins is going to say, well, yeah, when I was running, you didn't endorse me. And so now whatever policies you want, you know what, those can wait. And so they'll probably stay more on the sideline in this election until there's a nominee, and then they'll probably endorse the nominee for the general election.
Now, the candidates who are lower down in the polls, is there anything that they can do in the last week to boost their campaign?
Well, the two that you're speaking of, Martin Long and John Massino, no, they're under 1%. They're running, I'm not sure, on whatever specific issues. Their neighbors and their family hopefully will vote for them, but they're not going to get more than 1 or 2%. It's really tight right now between Brownsberger, Katusian, Sciortino, and Spilka, with Clark in the lead. So they're all going to be attacking Clark over the next 4 days. And it's a problem for all of them, especially the males, because it's clearly seen that when male candidates attack female candidates, that their favorability numbers drop down. Remember what happened with Scott Brown when he attacked Elizabeth Warren. His favorability number dropped about 8 points, and some people argue that was one of the turning points in the election. And so they got to be very careful of attacking, which is why Democrats, one of the strategies by the DNC here in Massachusetts is to get more women candidates to run for office. And in fact, there's only one woman congressional member, Nikki Tsongas, who was elected a few years ago, and obviously Elizabeth Warren recently. So this would make it for a potential third woman to be elected to the federal legislative branch of our state.
And what about the Armenian vote with Katusian?
Yeah, Katusian is really banking on this Armenian vote out in the Watertown and Belmont areas. The problem is that in Belmont you have Brownsberger, and Brownsberger is pulling part of that vote. And so part of the strategy where you would think that Katusian would be able to make inroads, he's being blocked by Brownsberger over there. And then as far as the overall Armenian vote, while it is significant in that area, that middle area of the district, it doesn't carry throughout the district. And so while Katusian will pull up part of that vote, they're not going to be able to change the momentum. He seems to be actually slipping in the polls.
All right, Spencer Kimball, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
This concludes our WEBN special Political Pulse and Polling. I'm Maggie Smolka. Thank you for watching.